Good afternoon, everybody. This is a continuation to my previous presentation, which the title is the Victorian Age. Now, this one will discuss about the salient features of Victorian Age. I beg your pardon, it will be a bit longer because it has multiple slides, and you will see that in time. But before I start, I would like to say again, that's my request. Please like, share, and subscribe my channel and show your support. So this is Arindam Bag here, Department of English, Maharaja Nandakumar Mahavidyalaya, and today we are going to discuss about the salient features of Victorian Age. So let us move. So what we got here in the Victorian Age, the Victorian literature, it is the literature produced during the reign of Queen Victoria. Obviously, it is. Obviously, there should not be any doubt. That's why it is Victorian literature, isn't it? England was going through a tremendous cultural upheaval. Yes, it was going through a lot of change. It was facing a lot of things. I discussed some of them in my previous presentation. Please go and check the previous video. You will get why there was a lot of change. There was a lot of discoveries going on, a lot of things was going on. Now, in this section, it has been clearly mentioned the Victorian art and music had underwent a radical change. Yes, obviously, the previous age is known as Romantic Age, and this one is Victorian, and there is a difference in this age. Though the difference is slight, but it is huge. Also, in a philosophical aspect, in a practical aspect, you will find that there is a difference between these two ages. Now, Victorian age is much more radical in that section. If we compare the Romantic Age and Victorian Age, we will find that romantic movement, or Romantic Age, which preceded the Victorian Renaissance, had often portrayed the human pursuit of knowledge and power as a beautiful thing. For example, in the works of Wordsworth, exactly, if you read the works of Wordsworth, you will realize that pursuit of knowledge, it is like a power. Obviously, we all of these people who got this opportunity to go through education and to receive education, you are much more, or rather we are much more fortunate, and we enjoy the light of education in our life, aren't we? So the next part is the definition of poetry. Victorian poetry definition. What should be the definition? There should be a definition, isn't it? So poetry written during the reign of Queen Victoria from 1837 to 1901 is defined as Victorian poetry. Obviously, the defining characteristics of Victorian poetry are its focuses. What are those focuses? First one is sensory elements, and then it's recurring themes of the religion and science conflict. Yeah, that age was, torn between these two things, religion and science. There was a book which was written by Charles Darwin, Origin of Species. I hope you know this name, and if you don't know, please Google it and you will get the details. And its interest in medieval fables and legends. Yes, obviously, if you go through Tennyson's poetry, you will find particular poetry I would like to mention about, which tells about the medieval fables, especially the Arthurian legend. You will find that there's a poetry, and then the title of the poetry is The Lady of Shalott. If you go through that, you will get the very first an idea why it is like that. Even the very poetry we are going to read just after this session, it is Ulysses, that is also related, that is not related to medieval fables actually, that is related to the classical age, but they had this tendency to present legends, legendary characters in their poetry. So section of Victorian poetry. Now there are two sections of Victorian poetry. Now as we earlierly discussed, that there was a radical social change, and as much as such, many poets of this time didn't like the romanticized version of the society. Yes, they want to do something else. They do not want to continue that romantic element which was, in the earlier section. The Victorian poetry thus is divided into two main groups: High Victorian poetry and Pre-Raphaelite poetry. Now, the salient features of Victorian poetry. What are the features? Now, as I told you earlier, that the salient features, the most important and obvious characteristics of Victorian poetry was the use of sensory elements. Now, this is one of the most important feature of Victorian poetry. Most of the Victorian poets used imagery and senses to convey the scenes of struggles between religion and science. Sometimes, or rather in some of the places, it is also known as Victorian conflict, Victorian dilemmas and ideals about the nature and romance, which transport the readers into the minds and hearts of the people of the Victorian age. Even today, we realize there is a difference. Please ignore any noise which is coming back from my from my flat actually. I'm sorry for that. Salient features of Victorian poetry. Lord Alfred Tennyson lives up to this expected characteristic in most of his works. In most of the works, you will find the features which I explained earlier. The notable example I will mention this one, Mariana, in which Tennyson writes these are the lines: the doors upon their hinges creaked, the blue fly sung in the pane, the mouse behind the mouldering wainscot shrieked. These images of the creaking door, the blue fly singing in the window, and the mouse with the moldy wood paneling all work together to create a very definite image of an active yet lonely farmhouse. So I gave you one example, and how the images works and how it affects our mind, or how we see things through this poetry, that is also been explained. Now another thing is sentimentality. Yes, another characteristics of Victorian poetry was the sentimentality. Victorian poets wrote about bohemian ideas, furthered the imaginings of the romantic poets. Even poets like Emily Bronte, Lord Alfred Tennyson prominently use sentimentality in their poems. You will get to that also when you go through their poetry. Next is salient features of Victorian poetry continued. The husband and wife poet duo. I told you earlier in my earlier presentation also about Elizabeth Barrett Browning and Robert Browning, husband and wife. They conducted their love affair through verse and produced many tender and passionate poems. If you go through their poems, you will realize how passionate they are. Some of the famous poem written by Robert Browning is "My Lust Touches," "My Lust Right Together," Rabbi Ben Ezra, Grammarian's Funeral, Andrea del Sarto, and so many. And even that one is a very nice poem, that is Porphyria's Lover. If you go through that, then you will be amazed how Robert Browning deeply and correctly presented human psychology. So that's it's so beautiful. If you go through that, you will realize that one. Tennyson poetic style, the most prominent of the Victorian poets. He was the most prominent, obviously, and that's why he received the title of poet laureate for over 40 years. His poems were marked a wide range of topics, from romance to nature to criticism of political and religious institutions, a pillar of the establishment, not failing to attack the establishment. Nowadays we are observing that many people, they are not very vocal regarding some establishment. They are afraid of things like that. But Tennyson was not like that. Whenever he got that opportunity, if he had reason to do that, he definitely used his pen to share his opinions, share his concern about any things related to the society. That is the role of the intellectuals, no? Isn't it? This should be the ideal role of the intellectuals. A lot of people do not understand these things. Now the salient features of Victorian poetry, it is continue. Sorry. Yes, sorry. Tennyson's poetic style. Now here there is a charge of the Light Brigade, that it is the continuation of the previous slide, and where I mentioned that he criticized the establishment also. This one, Charge of the Light Brigade, was a fierce criticism of a famous military blunder. He used his poetry, his pen, to criticize a military blunder which happened during that time. Even in The Princess, we dealt with the pseudo chivalry common among the royalty. I told you that these people, at that time, people used to present these things. That means the chivalry and royalty, these things were very common. So The Princess also deals with that. In Memoriam dealt with Tennyson's exploration of his feelings of love, loss, and desire. I told you about that sentimentality, and you will get a first-hand experience in this poem, In Memoriam, where he explains his love, his loss, and desire through this particular poem, In Memoriam, which is actually written in the memory of Arthur Henry Hallam. Now, Tennyson poetic style. The reclaiming of the past was a major part of Victorian literature, with an interest in both classical and medieval literature of England. That's why, dear, that's why Ulysses is in your syllabus. Ulysses is written by Tennyson. Ulysses represented the classical age. That's why he chose that topic. He had a tendency to do things like this. Victorians loved the heroic, chivalrous stories of knights of old, and they hoped to regain some of that noble, courtly behavior and impress it upon the people, both at home and in the wider empire. Yes, that's why I mentioned about that Lady of Shalott poem. Na? So if you go through that, you will understand that heroic, chivalrous stories of the knights. That particular poem is also related to heroic and chivalrous stories. It was actually a story of a particular woman named the Lady of Shalott, but it is connected, or it directly it indicates the famous knight of King Arthur's Round Table, and there even the capital of King Arthur's capital is also mentioned there, Camelot. That was the capital of King Arthur. So you will have this reference there. Tennyson's Idylls of the King, which blended the stories of King Arthur, particularly those by Thomas Malory, with contemporary concerns and ideas. I told you about in the last point I mentioned about King Arthur, and again also here Idylls of King, actually it is blended with the stories of King Arthur. Now other contributors, there are other contributors also. Some of them are notable names are given over here. Those are G.M. Hopkins, Gerald Manley Hopkins, who drew his inspiration from Beowulf. And now Beowulf, we know that Beowulf is our first epic, isn't it? So next point we have this Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, which also drew on myth and folklore for their art. Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, I told you earlier about, I gave reference to this. This is the next section, High Victorian and Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood. Now in this particular section, Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, we have the Rossetti brother and sister. We have this Dante Gabriel Rossetti and Cristiano Rossetti. Both of them, they are brother and sister, regarded as the chief poet amongst them, though modern scholars consider his sister Cristiano Rossetti to be a stronger poet of the two. Yes, obviously. Now apart from the poetry, some other elements were also available which directly present Victorian age. So those are comic verse, which were very much common in that time, abounded in the Victorian era. Magazines such as Punch magazine, Fun magazine teamed with the humorous invention and were aimed at well-educated readership. Here people enjoy that also, not only poems. The most famous collection, these things are known as comic verses. These are a little bit light, not very serious. The most famous collection of Victorian comic verse is the Bab Ballads. So these are the things related to the literature. I tried to mention all the things. I'm little bit fast because I need to keep all the presentation within 15 minutes. My last presentation was almost 10 minutes. So I'll keep this presentation within 14 minutes. So this is Victorian era is an important era in the history of poetry, providing the link between the Romantic movement and the modernist movement, Pre-Raphaelitism of the 20th century. So that will be all. Thank you very much for watching my video. I hope you like this one, you will share this one, and you will subscribe my channel. Thank you again. Stay home, stay safe.